Hey there, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. We always look forward towards seeing Ukraine striking more targets in Russia, seeing them ablaze and impacting Russian performance. But today we're going to be looking at the second step of that attacks, is specifically the Russian economy. What is it, how it is doing, and what's happening with some of their allies? It's not going well. A bit of a spoilers here add on. So let's talk about that, and let's talk about some of the other news in today's Ukraine Daily News Show. Let's begin. One of the big indicators about the state of the Russian economy that I follow is the numbers that are represented by big global organizations, such as the IMF or World Bank. And this is because I know for a fact that Russia is cooking their books about the economy and they are over-reporting their successes. And it is very bad even if you just bounce off of this data. The IMF has again lowered their forecast for the Russian GDP growth in 2025 by 0.3% to just 0.6% from 0.9%. 0.9% by itself was not high already, but now being lowered to 0.6% forecast in IMF is pretty much damning. If you had any doubts about the state of Russian economy, then this is pretty much just stating that Russian economy is very much cooked. Because beforehand, IMF would be stating that overall Russia is doing well. They would be stating that the economy is growing 2, 3, potentially even 4% growth. This is what we would expect from the IMF. But 0.6%, that's not a good number for sure. It is important also to see the context as IMF reports general developing economies and world economy to actually do better than was expected from the first initial forecasts in this year. They were actually reversing some of their forecasts upwards for countries except Russia. But then if you want more sources, why don't you listen to the pro-Kremlin economic experts that are stating that Russian economy is in complete downturn and potentially can hit recession in 2026. And this is funny because IMF, we just mentioned, is projecting that Russian economy will grow in 2026 by 1%. And my question is, how? From where? Nothing is changing for Russia. Things are only going one way and one way only, downhill from here. Russia is struggling with the war it started, and this war is smothering Russian economy. One of the important things that is also outlined by the guys from the Center of Macroeconomic Analysis and Short-Term Forecasting is that Russian economy technically already is in recession. If you take out all of the growth that is subjected to military spending. So when you look at the spending in sectors and industries that are not directly related to military spending, then you suddenly see that we have been in the recession for the Russian economy for a while now already. And 2026, it's gonna deepen even more. 2025 was pretty good year for crops. In the region of Ukraine, Russia, European part of Russia, there was record-breaking harvests of crops such as corn or wheat. But now we're getting reports that due to the weather conditions and heavy snowfall, some of the Russian agricultural regions are seeing 20 to 30% harvest drops in those specific regions. This is really bad. Russia really banked that agriculture this year will be lifting up the whole economy altogether. And we saw that indeed. One of the main reasons, for example, why Russia lowered their interest rate and we saw just general trend on declining inflation was specifically during the harvest season when we saw price of products that were freshly harvested dropping. But it was seasonal, and as the season passed by, we first saw a reversal of trend of the inflation reduction, and now we're seeing also more damning reports that some of these later crops are now not going to get harvested in the amounts projected. Russian coal miners are forced to sell their products to China at a 20% discount rate. And while this talks about coal and about the state that losing European markets and other world markets due to sanctions, now forcing to sell their products to Asian countries, is bringing some additional troubles for Russia, such as 20% discount rate to China. But I think this story is a bit wider. This is very representative of selling anything to China. So we will talk today a little bit more about what is happening between Russia and China, but this already sets the stage. China is caring first and foremost about China, and China is not an easy partner to talk and work with for Russia. And they are cutthroat, and they know the position that Russia is in, and they are demanding from anything being sold to China to be sold at a discount. And I know some people are not very savvy in the economics, so here is a great article that I think summarizes for people in a nutshell. The State Duma has proposed selling pills individually to save money. To reduce medical costs, Russians should be given the option to buy pills individually rather than in packages, a member of the State Duma Committee on Budget and Taxes told Federal Press. And I think this paints exactly the picture where Russian society is finding themselves in. Do they still have access to medicine? Yes, they do. They can still buy their medicine. But because of the tightening budget situation, they're now picking and choosing which pill they can buy today and which pill they can buy tomorrow. Remember, Russia can end this war at any day of the week now. They could have taken any number of deals that was proposed to them, and this is all self-inflicted pain. Another industry that is very indicative of the state of the Russian economy is the automotive industry. Truck imports to Russia have plummeted 20-fold. In September, only 643 new trucks with gross vehicle weight of over 3.5 tons were imported to Russia. Not 635,000, 643 trucks. Compared to September last year, when it was the number of 12,600. It is dead. Overall, the auto market is estimated to be declining 55% due to huge inventories of unsold stock and the suspension of the OTTS, which is a document without which a car cannot be solved, confirming its technical specification for some models for Chinese vehicles. Soviet Union 2.0 is approaching light speed to Russia. Right now, there is discussion about setting an oil price cap at the gas station. And this is a typical Soviet knee-jerk reaction of the communist or communist wannabe. Because what they essentially want to say is that because the prices are uncomfortable and they're a bit too high and just not very nice to work with, so therefore let's just have the state decide what the price for gasoline should be, no matter what else is happening in the world and in the world market. I mean, it worked excellently for the Soviet Union. I'm pretty sure nothing will go wrong here whatsoever. Bloomberg is writing that frozen Russian assets are seen in EU as the best bet to sustain Ukraine aid going forward. And I am very happy that this is happening. This is great. We have seen progress on this ongoing. European officials are reportedly now finally getting down to the nitty-gritties with Belgium to find a solution to unlock over 200 billion euros of Russian assets that are locked and frozen. My problem is, and this is where I'm going to be bashing Europe, is that it is coming in tandem with this article, which is that by Kiel Institute estimates, they saw almost twofold drop in support for Ukraine in the last couple of months. Specifically, here is the table. So as you can see, compared to January to June, the support for Ukraine averaged to about 3.8 billion euros. However, in July-August, it was just around 2 billion, almost 2 times lower. And this is, for me, super troubling, because what I was always looking at the Russian assets and what Europe needs to do is we need to do support for Ukraine, but also release Russian assets to sustain Ukraine, to help Ukraine win, because we need to just give as much as we can now so Ukraine gets strong, and then they can basically take care of this themselves, because there hasn't been a massive influx of money to Ukraine. We've been drip feeding Ukraine for very, very long. It is barely any money, to be honest. However, if it's going to be like, oh, we're going to be releasing potentially the Russian assets anyway, therefore there is no need for us to potentially release any more help to Ukraine, well, then we're going to get the worst of both worlds. I mean, 200 billion is still a lot. You can do a lot for 200 billion. It should be able to finance Ukraine at the rate that it was financed so far for about 3 years, which is great. But it would be much better if we would do both. Chinese support for Russia is still going strong, and they're hiding it less and less. They boost drone component exports to Russia over tenfold, strengthening the Russian war machine. China's support for Russia's drone industry is quietly reshaping the war in Ukraine, as stated here in the article from United 24. The trade data shows that exports of fiber optic cable to Russia surged nearly tenfold in August, reaching roughly 325,000 miles, over 500,000 kilometers of fiber optic cable supplied to Russia. So all of these FPVs with fiber optics that are burning Ukrainian vehicles, that are preventing Ukraine to conduct offensive operations and kick Russia out of their sovereign land, is because of China. So us not pressuring China enough in Europe is what is happening. We need to finally realize who our enemies are. But I want to draw once again your attention that it is not easy to work with China. China is caring about China, and they are putting pressure on Russia. Chinese imports to Russia have fallen by 21%. So this is incredibly important, because this is both to do with the tariffs that Chinese are putting on Russia. I know they're not called tariffs, but if China is demanding discount from Russia, like, can you find me a difference between a tariff and this, except Russia is paying for those? But also, it is also state of the Russian economy. It is once again indicating that Russia just don't have the available funds to continue importing Chinese goods at the level that they were importing before. This is going to skew the trade balance. This is going to really screw Russia over in a long term. And I mean, not that I'm going to cry over Russia becoming Chinese vassal state, but China is going to have another vassal state. Another bizarre law that has been introduced by Russia, allowing Russians to attract reservists without declaring martial law. And this is a bizarre law that was signed by Putin, because it doesn't really it's not very clear who it is targeting. Because right now there is a mobilization law that is already ongoing in Russia. Russia can mobilize and get any people into the military as they want. Potentially what they want to do is they want to milk some of the official reservists to the military, essentially allowing to call in these reservists, but it could have been done under mobilization law itself. You don't need a separate law for this. So very unclear what specifically this law meant. Potentially this is political posturing, but what we need to understand that this law changes really nothing. Russia had the means to mobilize reservists if they wanted. It's just another talking point, and you might just see this headline appearing. Russia is continuing committing their war crimes even against United Nations representatives. I mean, not that anyone cares anymore in this world. Everyone just kind of gave up on anything that has to do with war rules or whatever it is, and just kind of went with the flow, just kind of springing over anything that Russia is doing. So yeah, but Russia bombed additional humanitarian aid trucks, clearly white, clearly marked as humanitarian aid, but it doesn't matter for Russians. Ukrainian intelligence is exposed 145 Russian companies linked to the Rostec, the weapons developments company of Russia, and over half of these companies are actually not under any sanctions from European Union and United States, which once again brings us to the point that there should be a very clear understanding that there needs to be wide, broad sanctions for whole industries. And then from these industries, you can case by case start excluding Russian companies if you really feel that you need to. This is not the way. This is not how we should be approaching this. And this is definitely one of the areas we still have place to improve. I mean, it's been 3.5 years. Can we get this over with? A true horror story is now being reported from the Altai Republic of Russia. Supposedly, it will be the first Russian region to impose complete ban on alcohol sales on weekends and holiday. Any person that is living in Russia probably have cold sweat running down their neck by this point if they see news like this. But for us, we need to understand that Russians are docile while they get access to their vodka. We've seen this happen in the Tsarist Russia, we've seen this happen in the Soviet Union, where prohibition laws have been a big driver for social unrest. Russians are addicted, they like to drink, they need to drink, and prohibiting them from doing that is even worse than just killing a whole bunch of them, what Putin is doing right now. If you made it this far, please click subscribe button if you haven't done so already. It will really help elevate the video in the algorithms so more people can see it. Thank you so much for watching this video. Continue supporting Ukraine, trust in Ukrainian armed forces. I love you. Slava Ukraini, and I will see you next time.